everybody. I'm glad you could make it here to this event this evening. I'm Dr. Gail Presby. I'm the director of PLASA. That's the Kearney Latin American Solidarity Archive. We put on peace and justice programming with a focus on Latin America, but spanning out to broader issues. You will see the Latin America connection for the Catonsville 9 action. There is one. Anyway, you will see it unfold later this evening. You don't know it already. But we have an archive on campus that has the papers of Father James Guadalupe Kearney. He was a Jesuit who had been a student at this university. He went to Honduras. He worked with the landless in Honduras for their rights. He was disappeared, presumed dead, in Honduras in 1983. If you're at all interested in this archive, let me know. We have his papers, and it's in his memory, responding to his courageous witness and his work of solidarity with the poor of Honduras, that we put on the series of peace and justice programming, of which this is one of our events. And since I mentioned Father Kearney is in Honduras, let me just say 2 weeks from today, we will have a band of musicians from Honduras who will be performing here and telling us about the human rights situation in Honduras today. The flyers for that are in the back. But today we are taking a look at an important part of history in the peace, an important chapter in the peace and justice history of our country. We will be looking at a documentary called Hit and Stay, which will help us all learn more about the Catonsville 9. And to introduce the documentary is the documentary maker, Joe Tropea, who's a filmmaker, a historian, who has done in-depth interviews with participants of the Catonsville 9, and he will tell us now a little bit about how he came to make this film. So please join me in welcoming Joe Tropea.
Thank you. I want to start by thanking Dr. Presby and the University of Detroit Mercy for having me here tonight. And I want to thank you all for coming out on a Wednesday night to watch a documentary. Good for you. So I will keep my remarks brief, but I do want to tell you a little bit about how I got here. By training, I'm a historian, but I also happen to have a lot of friends who are filmmakers, and throughout the years, I helped them make their movies. And at a certain point, I wanted to make my own, and I saw an opportunity to do history and make movies, and that appealed to me. So with Hit and Stay, I started out thinking that I was making a movie about the Catonsville 9. And it took me about 7 years to complete, but by the end of it, I realized I had discovered a whole other story. So I ended up at a different place from where I started, and it's a complex story. So we interviewed a lot of people. You're going to see a lot of faces on the screen and a lot of archival footage. And at times you'll notice that they contradict one another, and I like that. To me, that's how history works. Everyone views things differently, and I think you'll see that. So without really saying anything else or spoiling anything, let's watch the film. Afterwards, I'll be back for a Q&A, and actually after the film, Jerry Berrigan, who appears in the film, is going to talk to you a little bit, and then we'll field some questions if you all have any. So think up some questions, and a quick commercial. I brought some DVDs with me, so if anyone's interested in obtaining a copy, they can do that tonight. Just come see me after the screening. So enjoy.
let me also take this opportunity to thank the Michigan Coalition for Human Rights and University Ministry for co-sponsoring this event. Also, the support of JZU, Peace and Justice Committee. All of these groups have come together to help us put on this event, and we are very grateful. So thank you to all of them, and thank you to you for coming.
We have Jerry Berrigan here. Is the son of Phil Berrigan and Elizabeth Ellister, and nephew of Dan Berrigan. And he's a Michigan-based, he's activist. You saw him briefly in the film. And so now he's going to get a chance to give his reflections on the film and on the movement that's a part of the film.
Aha, I hear it has come on in the nick of time. So please join me in welcoming Jerry Berrigan.
Good to see everyone tonight. Before I get going, let me see by a show of hands, how many of you are students here? Most of them, that's great. Put your hands back up if this stuff is new. Okay, if you're a student here and you've heard of any of this stuff before, raise your hand. A few, great. Okay, so as Gail mentioned, my name is Jerry Berrigan. My parents are Elizabeth McAllister and Philip Berrigan, who were profiled rather extensively in the film. I had a short quote there. I didn't have any gray hair back then. And I just want to say a little about kind of bringing this current as it happened in my life. You know, my parents, my father served 3 years in federal prison from 1970 until 1973. After he was released, they both left their religious orders and ceased becoming a nun and a priest and got married and helped found a community in Baltimore, Maryland, where I and my two sisters grew up. And the point of that community, the focus of that community, was kind of intensive scripture study and resistance to war. So we grew up repeatedly driving an hour south of Washington, D.C., and going to protests at places like the White House, the Pentagon, the International Monetary Fund, Capitol, Supreme Court, and other kind of centers of power unjustly wielded. And we saw our parents and other people we knew very well and loved arrested time and time again. And over the course of their marriage, my parents were separated about 14 years by prison. And I'm sure you're going to have some questions about that. It's an unusual way to grow up, you could say. And out of that, my sisters and I are both trying to keep it going and be peace activists. We are convinced that this is very important work, that the world needs this of us, that it's good to do this, it's rewarding to do this, it's life-giving to do this, and the best people are doing it. Right? So not only should we do it, but how could we not do it when the company is so good? We see this work as an overwhelmingly affirmative and positive thing to be about. I now live in Kalamazoo. I went to Kalamazoo College in the 90s, and I get to live with 3 of my college classmates in community and we do lots of neighborhood work and like after-school programs with kids and things like that. Recently, and this is kind of apropos of my line in the film having to do with the little Pentagons, the military-industrial complex is in every congressional district, and it just moved into ours. So our nearby Air National Guard base now has a command where people go to work, people who work for the Air National Guard, and they fly airplanes halfway across the world. And they're doing surveillance on people. These are, drone aircraft, which are remote-controlled airplanes, right? So they're doing surveillance and bombing missions in places like Yemen and, perhaps Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, perhaps Iraq. And that's kind of the new weapon of choice for the overseas projection of U.S. power. We have serious moral problems with this. It strikes us as a very cowardly way to do your business. It's a movement from war to outright murder, right? When you can sit in a room in Battle Creek, Michigan, and kill someone in Afghanistan, it leads to kind of serious moral distress on the part of people who are forced to do this for their work, not to mention on the part of people who are on the receiving end of those bombs. And so, we would like to invite you all, many of these in the back of the room, to a protest at the gates of the Air National Guard base in Battle Creek next month. Lydia Wiley-Kellerman is your Detroit contact. Her phone number is on the sheet. Please take that and come join us in saying no to drone warfare. Recently, I mentioned that Molly and Jen and Mike and I were classmates at Kalamazoo College. Recently, we were profiled by the college's online newspaper because of our, both neighborhood work and anti-drone work. And the piece was rather disappointing. After having done some research, the person who was writing it called up and said, the editors want us to provide a balanced view of drone warfare. And, that's when we started to get suspicious, but it was kind of already out of our control, right? So by balance, they meant that they gave us half the piece, and they gave the PR person from the base the second half of the piece and the last word. Yeah. And, it was all kind of pretty predictable stuff from him. Drones are preferred because they don't cause U.S. casualties, and the presumption there is that your life doesn't matter if you're not American, right? That they are, more surgical, more humane. It's a more humane way of waging war. Right? All of which we reject. Right? It's wrong to fly an airplane in someone else's country and kill their people. It's not right. And I believe our faith has something to say about that. And if it doesn't have anything to say about that, then it's not worth anything. Right? If being Catholic means that you're opposed to gay marriage and nothing more, then I need to see the exit. So I want to close. I'm sure we're going to have a robust Q&A involving both myself and Joe. We'd be happy to answer questions about the making of the film or about anything at all. But I want to close with a little bit out of the trial of the Catonsville line. So my Uncle Daniel took the trial transcripts from that first draft rate action and turned them into a piece of theater, which has been produced all over the place. It could be produced here. You guys wanted it to. And so here's an exchange between the prosecution and Tom Lewis, who was one of the participants in the action and a longtime friend of our family. Prosecution. Did you consider, oh, sorry, no. Go ahead. Tom Lewis says, relative to what they did in Catonsville, I wasn't concerned with the law. I wasn't even thinking about the law. I was thinking of what those records meant. I wasn't concerned with the law. I was concerned with the lives of innocent people. I went in there with the intent of stopping what the files justified. The young men whose files we destroyed have not yet been drafted, may not be drafted, may not be sent to Vietnam for cannon fodder. My intent in going there was to save lives. A person may break the law to save lives. Judge, if these men were not sent, other people would have been sent, who would not otherwise have been sent, would they not? Tom Lewis. Well, why, Your Honor? Why this? Why does it have to be like this? It's a good question, right? Why does it have to be like this? You were accepting the fact that if these men are not sent, other men will be sent. You are not even asking what can be done to stop this insane killing. What can be done to stop the genocide? What can be done to stop the conditions in Latin America? You are not dealing with these things. You are accepting this. As in Nazi Germany, people accepted the massacre of other people. This is insane. I protest this. Thank you. So I think what we'll do is, if you have a question for Joe, I'll sit down. And if you have a question for me, Joe will sit down. Does that make sense?
And I have a roving microphone. And so I would like to see who would like to ask a question. And I will hand you the microphone so you can ask your question of either one of our speakers. Great. I have a question for Joe. I was just wondering, what exactly prompted you to make this documentary?
That's a good question. Thanks. I grew up watching a lot of movies, and a lot of them, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and that was about the time that Hollywood started churning out all these Vietnam movies. So I was kind of obsessed with, like any young kid, action movies. And the Vietnam movies really got to me. And later in life, I became interested in history, and I started thinking, like, why was I interested in those movies? What was it about, the Vietnam flick that captured my attention? And I still don't really have a good answer to that. But I was interested in the Vietnam War as a historian, and I thought, it would be interesting to look at the reaction in the U.S. to the war. And that's it in a nutshell. I'd heard of the Catonsville Nine growing up in Baltimore. You just heard about that, but I didn't really understand it. And there was actually a movie produced, I think it was 2002, called Investigation of a Flame. It was a short documentary that dealt with the Catonsville Nine. And I saw the film and I liked it a lot, but I came away from it with a lot of questions. There were things about it I didn't understand, and I thought there must be more to the story. And so as a history student, I decided to write a paper about the Catonsville Nine. And I became really interested in the people behind the Nine, like the support activists. I use that term a lot in the movie. It took more than 9 people to pull off an action like Catonsville. And I became very interested in that. And as I started to meet these people, I started hearing about other actions and other names, and it slowly occurred to me how connected all these actions were. So that's when I thought, well, I can't just make a movie about the Catonsville Nine. I have to investigate the full story. That's basically it.
I really enjoyed the documentary and appreciate you gentlemen coming out here to our campus. I just had a question considering the Virgil coming up in November at Fort Benning. If you have any interest in documenting the history of the SOA as it relates to like the Jesuits.
Yeah, I'm actually working on another film now, but yeah, I'm very interested in that. There was so much leftover footage from this movie. I could do, I have the start of a good documentary about the Plowshares movement. There's a lot of footage about Guatemala that completely got cut out of this. And I do follow what goes on with the SOA Watch, but I don't have any plans to make a documentary about that yet, but I'm open, so thank you.
Another question?
So I have a question for Jerry. I'm wondering, Jerry, if you could talk about what it was like growing up with peace activist parents, and so at some point one of your parents was in jail for an extended period of time, and I'm wondering what that was like as a young person growing up, and what's it like now looking back on it as a parent.
Yeah, well, we have nothing to compare it to by way of other childhoods, right? So it was the one we had. My parents were very concerned that we understood why they were doing what they were doing, and they were always kind of ready and available to have the big conversation. So, just to put a little more to the picture, we grew up in a 3-story row house in Baltimore's Reservoir Hill neighborhood, which was, there were a few kind of people trying to gentrify it, but it was largely African-American neighborhood, quite poor. We were the only white kids in our class through middle school. And that had its whole set of challenges and gifts as well, So we'd come home after having been beaten up and robbed for our bikes and so forth, and have to deal with that. And it was kind of a living lesson in the ways of the American inner city. That was our life. And then the house was full of, depending on the time, 4 to 14 other people might be living there with us. And some of them were a little bit strange, but most of them were really serious people, and really, really good people. Yeah. So our childhoods were really blessed by kind of not only meeting and knowing, but having kind of deep relationships, almost family-like relationships, with many really incredible folks. Some of whom were saints, and so that was quite enriching. My sister Frida has made the comment that we grew up under the shadow of the mushroom cloud. So like by the time we were quite young, in the late 1970s, our parents had shifted focus, for the most part, from the direct kind of smaller wars that our government always is fighting, right, to the nuclear arms race, which during that time, until the end of the Cold War, in 1991, quite literally carried the threat of destroying all life on Earth at a moment's notice, right? We have missiles which can be delivered to Russia inside of 12 minutes, and they're still on alert, right? At the whim of the president, they can fly. And things were very, very hot in the 1980s. We had Reagan in the White House, nuclear war could happen at any minute, and we felt that very closely. And we didn't want to die in a nuclear war. Right? So when we went to the Pentagon, it wasn't just that the grown-ups would be doing their thing, although they were doing things that we couldn't participate in, right? But we carried ourselves into that as well, and we found a way of having our voice heard there too. And my sister and I were both arrested at the White House before we were done with elementary school. And we made that choice, right? We were encouraged to make that choice, but we could have said no. And we made that choice. And our criminal activity kind of continued, not at the pace that our parents were able to maintain, but it's kind of still ongoing. Now I'm a parent, as you mentioned. I've got 3 kids who are 4, 8, and 10. And you know, they are growing up in a Catholic worker community, and they are expected to help with our work, which brings some benefit to their peers in the neighborhood. Right? We run tutoring programs out of our homes 4 days a week. We run a kind of a long summer program for the kids in the neighborhood who otherwise wouldn't have anything to do. We've turned our backyard into kind of a private park that we open up on a very regular basis to kids who need a place to be that's safe, where there's going to be a healthy snack, where they're going to, you know, have something offered to them which is going to be not only enjoyable but helpful to them. And our kids know that, and they appreciate that. They see the value in it. And our oldest son is now, every now and then, can become tutoring a 6-year-old. You know? Meanwhile, they play soccer and they go to swim lessons and they do all kinds of things like that. So, you know, we're not making all of the same choices that our parents made or that my parents made. But I think the ethic is still very much there.
Thank you, Jerry. I'm just in awe of how you're carrying on everything that you were given as a child and that you're giving your own children now. I was going to talk about the School of the Americas before the young lady did, but I also want to ask, since there's so much repression now against being arrested, there's, you know, you go to a protest and you have to stay a block or 2 away in a fenced-in area is the free speech area. And what advice do you give for somebody willing to take their first action? Because I've been in the DC detention center twice, and you know, now there's so much hard line coming down that it's discouraging for anybody, I imagine, to start out on that path.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. You know, I need to be kind of honest about my own involvement in kind of directly protest-related stuff. It's been pretty thin over the past decade or so as the kids have been young, and as we've been getting our neighborhood work established and going. So this vigil that we're doing in November is going to be the 2nd time we're at the Air National Guard base since June. You know, I think you need to be very careful if you're planning to go protest at a military installation, because increasingly, you know, not only the hardware, but the mind state of law enforcement in America has become militarized, right? So they're going to assume, they're going to have been taught to assume that you were coming there with some sort of violent intent, right? And you need to be careful with that. So coming into our first protest, in June, a group of people walked from Chicago to Battle Creek, which is 163 miles. It took them 14 days. And to celebrate the end of the walk, 100 of us gathered at the gates of the base and vigiled for an hour. So coming into that, we made sure we contacted the public relations people at the base, and we told them we were coming. We assured them of our nonviolence. We put our names on the line. We gave them our websites and stuff. You can look us up. You can talk to anybody. We're coming there because we oppose drone warfare, not because we disrespect you personally, and certainly not because we're planning on doing you any harm. But we're really concerned about what this means for our country. And so far, those conversations have been going quite well. I guess I would say it's really important to continue to speak out as best you can, wherever you can, as often as you can. Because if you don't speak out, we might as well not have the First Amendment. What's it good for if we don't use it? Right? If you believe in something, go stand for it. See what happens. I mean, Gandhi called these experiments the truth. And each one is a learning experience. You come away with a story and with deeper insight. You know more than when you started. It's going to help you make your decisions next time. But it's very important to keep speaking out the piece as often and as clearly as you can. And to take it to the sites of power where murderous decisions are being made. Right? So I encourage you all to do it. See what happens. But also be careful and let them know that you're coming non-violently. That's very important. Not only ethically, but tactically as well.
Another question?
The Catonsville action was really important in my own life in all kinds of ways. I was at seminary in New York and went down to the three events in Harrisburg, Camden 28 trial. And I knew of the Milwaukee 14 and the Chicago 15. And I was actually surprised by the extent and number of actions, draft board actions and corporate actions and things that flowed from that. And you kind of hinted at how that series of actions is underneath Plowshares movement as well. I'm not sure how to get at my question, but it has to do with what it was in the moment that enabled, an initial action, Baltimore 4 and the Catonsville, to spark other people's conscience and act in similar ways. And I hunger for that. It's a question for both of you, I think. I hunger for that in our own moment.
Well, it's a good question. I don't know how to answer your question, how did it spark with other people, but I am in awe of how it did. There were so many actions we couldn't cover in the film, and unfortunately we cut out a lot of good stories. But yeah, it's amazing how it spread and how it spoke to people. So I guess my hope is that people can still be inspired in the same way. Even though we're in different times and we're certainly dealing with different consequences these days. What do you think?
I mean, I can't begin to think about an answer to that question without thinking about what's happened in the moral status of the Catholic Church in the ensuing time. It's been deeply, deeply degraded. Right? And the Church has degraded itself. Its own clerics have discredited it. And, there was an understanding that leaders within the Catholic Church had some kind of, if not objective, at least credible moral offering. And we don't have that faith anymore. And I think we've become kind of less of a faith-based nation since the 1960s as well. And that has consequences for good and for ill. But I think it's certainly a factor in kind of assessing why this was such a spark. I long for it too, Bill, but you know, I think each day we're given the opportunity to do something, and we're given the people that we live with to do that with, and so we do it, and that's awesome that we get to do it. So I'm just glad to be here with you and with all of you. So, there's a question in the back.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the movie, but I can't help but wonder that at the flaring, that they felt the nine, that they felt they needed to present a white, middle class front and face, and not add any other element. In fact, all of those movements seem to have that in common. Even though at that time the civil rights movement had gained quite a bit of momentum in doing peaceful, nonviolent protests. That's kind of a question.
So yes, that there is a glaring omission. The first thing, and I think we alluded to it, but maybe it could have been more clear, but a lot of these folks came from the civil rights movement. In fact, in Baltimore, Jerry's father was involved with a civil rights group. I'm blanking on the name, but when he made the decision to do Catonsville, he publicly distanced himself from that group in the hope that his deeds would not cast a bad light on them. So all of the early actions were people old enough to have been involved in the civil rights movement, and in fact they were. And I suppose another thing that's pretty obvious is that I think you would only count 2 African Americans in the film. And to my knowledge, there were only 2 actions that had African Americans in them. And I think the thing with that is that there were a lot of other things going on, and particularly, you know, in the African American community, the Black Panthers were happening. There were all these other reactions to the war and to our country. So in a sense, they didn't act together, but I know for a fact that they met with members of Black Panthers and talked and were, I mean, the one action in New Haven, they named brothers and sisters as a direct reference to we are all brothers and sisters. And there happened to be a trial in New Haven at that time where some Panthers were being prosecuted. So they consciously chose that name to show that they were aligned in spirit. I don't know, what, do you have a reaction?
I mean, I think for my father's case, certainly, he first came to know America through living with and struggling with African American people against American racism. And when I say he came to know America, he came to know America as hateful and repressive and murderous, because he was a priest in New Orleans in the late 1950s and early 1960s. And you know, you can imagine what his high school students had to endure. He was teaching at an all-black high school in New Orleans on their way to and home from school. And it was a revelation to him, and it was a complete and total moral outrage to him. And he came to I mean, I guess his thing was, if white racists hate black people, I mean, how can they do that in the sight of God? Because God loves all of God's children, right? So racism is not only a crime against the human person, it's a direct crime against God. And that, he became outraged by that. He took it personally. And both he and Dan marched in Selma and so forth. And so many of these people came to know America through stuff like the Freedom Rides, and they were deeply radicalized by that. And they came away from it saying, we're going to have no part in that. We're going to resist that. We're going to call for something better, something different, something more human, something more Christian. And as the war heated up, it just led on a moral trajectory of sorts. So I would say that he was radicalized by civil rights, and became an anti-war activist, and just really felt like he had to keep the focus on that. But it is a valid critique. I mean, people in the peace movement are always saying, why is the peace movement so white? Are we not welcoming enough? And there's all kinds of baggage, as you know, in America around race. Right? It's so hard for white people and black people to sit down together and be real with each other. Why is that? And I guess I would only say, it doesn't have to be like that, and it can stop with each one of us. We can climb that wall. How do you do it? I don't know. Figure it out. Do it. We moved into a black neighborhood. That's where we live. We love our neighborhood. We love the kids who live down the street. They play with our kids. It can happen. Does that erase everything? Have we fixed racism? No. Well, we're building relationships that are real. And it's very, very important work because we have to share this world together. Is that at all helpful?
Thank you. Yeah, that's very good.
Good question.
We have another question.
Okay, I just want to say good job on the movie. That was really good. I was just wondering, just out of curiosity, how much it is for a copy of the DVD?
I have DVDs in back selling them for $20, so I can't take credit cards, unfortunately, because I'm just me. But I'm glad to talk to you when we get down.
Okay, and then my next question is, Suzanne Collins, the author of the Hunger Games trilogy, was heavily influenced by the Vietnam War. I was just wondering if when you constructed this, if you had any other influences that inspired you to make this, or was you basically just focusing on the historical facts and all the interviews?
I have a lot of documentary influences. I don't know that any of them would show through in the film. I love Earl Morris. I like Michael Moore. I would never want to make a movie like Michael Moore makes. Yeah, I really didn't. I thought of it more as a history project, almost a paper that I was writing. Only the medium was video and 16mm film, and yeah.
Is there any last question?
If nobody else will, maybe I can just ask a question. Joe, and I know you just couldn't help yourself because you had to keep to your topic and you couldn't use all your footage, but you met so many people who all told you about 40 years ago. Did you get some glimpse as to how did their lives unfold, and did you see a pattern? Did you see a pattern of people remaining faithful to this early time in their life? Did you hear any regrets? Or what did you find out?
We interviewed about 80 people over the course of probably 4 years. I found a wide variety. The ones that were most heartening to me were the ones that are still plugging away. There are definitely some folks that I met who were damaged by what they experienced, and I think part of that is the secrecy and paranoia behind what they did. I mean, who knows? But I definitely met a few people who it had taken a toll on. But one of the most rewarding parts of this for me was when I started out, I heard about this place called Viva House in Baltimore, which is a Catholic worker house, and it's a soup kitchen. And so I thought, well, I heard that the Catonsville 9 people had stayed there during the trial, and that some of the people there were support activists for the action. So I went there and met the folks and interviewed them, and then started showing up regularly and working with them. And I mean, they've been at it since 1968. So I mean, I'm just in all of them, and so yeah, there are still people out there doing it and as committed as they were from day one. And that's great.
Thank you both. Thank you both for sharing with us. And the wonderful show. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for staying. And come back in 2 weeks. Buy DVDs. Stay after and ask any personal questions you have. Exactly. Find out about Grounded Drones. All the information is in the back. Thank you all.